And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey folks, I'm Tom Vasel, and today we're talking about Terror Below, which is a game in which you are trying to go around and collect giant worm eggs while these giant underground worms, or whatever they are, something that cause tremors in the earth, are going around trying to eat you and attack you, and you shoot them with lots of guns. This is not based on any particular IP for sure, although every single person you talk to is going to assume so. It is a silly game of go around, pick things up, try to play movement cards, try to avoid the worms. When you do, you fight back against them. Very strong thematic style game. Here's how it plays. At the beginning of the game, you're going to play kind of with a standard setup where there's going to be different locations, like the hospital here, placed in various spots on the board, but you can randomize those locations or amongst the starting spots, or you can randomize them wherever you want. There's lots of rules you can optionally use or not. But there's going to be some preemptive worm attacks that are going to produce eggs of different colors on the board and scatter rubble across the board. But there's also, you're starting with 3 worms on the board. These worms, like for example, this is a boomer worm here, and this one is underneath number 1, and it starts at these coordinates here. You can see the coordinates 6, 3, blue 6, red 3, which is here, and then there's a number 1 token there. So that is that worm. There are 3 worms on the board. Each player is going to have a vehicle for that player on the board, and it will start at one of the locations, as well as you're going to have 3 different characters. You're going to pick one of them who you are. If that character gets eaten over the course of the game, then you'll pick another character, and I guess the dog can drive around in the car, but whatever. Each character, as you control that character, will have a special ability that they can use, and when they're gone, you'll have to use a different character's special ability. Characters will also start with items and a weapon that they'll be able to use at various points. It tells you how to use them. And they're going to have a handful of movement cards. They're going to show various vehicles. On a player's turn, they're going to pick one of these cards and play it underneath a worm. Worms can have a certain number of cards placed under them, equal to the number down here. This is the hit points. This is how many cards. When there are 4 cards underneath the boomer, this boomer is going to trigger. When you play a card underneath a worm, first you're going to move the worm according to the arrows on the card. So here I'm moving that worm 2 spaces to the right. So that would be worm number 1. Worm number 1 goes 1, 2, and moves over here. And if it hits a wall or whatever, it will kind of bounce off the wall. Then I have 4 action points to spend. That's what's here at the top. Now you can use those to move around the board, but you can't move in the rubble. However, you can use an action point to clear a rubble from an adjacent space. So I could go 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe on a future turn, if I had it now, I'd go 1, pick up all the eggs, putting them on my character card, 2, 3, 4. Once you have 3 rubble, you immediately will turn those in to draw either a weapon or an item card. Then the player will refill their hand back up to 3 movement cards, and it's the next person's turn. At the end of your turn, if there are enough cards, movement cards, on a worm to match the number at the bottom, that worm is going to attack. So let's say boomer is number 1, it's going to attack. The area of attack is all the shaded areas next to it. It's going to drop an egg of its color, so the boomer is an orange one. It would drop an egg here, and then it's going to throw rubble in all the spaces around it, with a maximum of 2 rubble per spot. Actually, it drops rubble where it's at too. If a player's vehicle's caught up, this one's safe, this one's not, that vehicle is going to die. Your leader is going to die unless you can stop it somehow. So you might have an item card like this lucky hat, which lets you roll a die and perhaps you'll survive the attack. Otherwise, you can use weapons to attack. So maybe I have a shotgun here. So the shotgun says discard during a worm attack, do 2 if you're 2 spaces away, 4 if you're 1 space, 6 if you're in the same space. Well, I'm 1 space away, so I can do 4 damage with that. Well, I look at the boomer, and the boomer has 10 health. So I'll also play this hunting rifle, which lets me roll 2 dice and do damage equal to the higher of the 2 dice. So I roll them, I got a 3 and a 6. Huzzah! 6 plus 4 is 10. I defeat the worm. Either way, whether the worm kills you or you kill the worm or the worm kills nobody, the worm is going to be discarded. A new worm comes out, Mrs. Tentacles in this instance. She's placed at coordinates 2, 4. So we take the 1 and go to 2, 4. 2, 4 is here. And we keep going. The point of the game is to collect these eggs and go to a location and get rid of the eggs. When you sell an egg, you're going to get 1 victory point as well as a benefit of where you are. So if you're at the police, you might get a weapon. If you're at the general store, you can get a free item, etc. At the top of the board, though, it will show you that if you deliver a specific colored egg, so like for example here, a purple or a magenta egg, if I deliver those to the state police, I'll get 2 victory points. While over here, if I deliver this blue egg to the motel, I'll get 3 victory points. If you defeat a worm, you'll get a victory point, unless, of course, one of these hunts are out. This says hunt. If I kill a blaster, I get 5 victory points. Or any worm, I get 4 victory points. When one of these is accomplished, you'll just take the card to show that you got those points, and then replacing it with a new card. Oh, another hunt for 4. But there's lots of cards in here that are deliveries and hunts. The different places want these eggs for whatever reason, and also there's different bounties put out on the worms. The game ends in 2 ways. If someone gets to 20 victory points, they win. Or if someone has lost all 3 of their characters and they've all died, everyone else gets 1 final turn, and one of those non-eliminated characters is the winner of the game. There's a few more rules, as if when you're moving, you can jump to a free spot over somebody. You can't go in the same spot as someone else. There's also an alternate side to the board that has a canyon where you can try to make a super long jump across the canyon. And I mentioned how you can play with different kinds of starting setups. There's also a solo game that you can play where you try to get a certain number of things accomplished. But it all plays in that same framework of rules. The game has some really cool components. The eggs here are hard plastic eggs. They look really cool. Different differentiations. We call them blue, purple, like magenta, orange, or whatever the colors are. The worms themselves, they look really cool. There's a worm in here, or a couple worms in here that are the big, nasty, mean. The queen, when she shows up, she drops lots of eggs and blows up a big area and takes 20 hit points. The massive one. The worm artwork's cool. Speaking of worm artwork, the game comes with a bunch of worms, and players always seem to be disappointed when I teach the game that these actually don't move around the board. For functionality, it's a whole lot easier to have this 2 moving around the board, and then it matches, the queen that's there. But having these giant monsters here, these are literally just to put around the board for picturesque purposes, and we found them to always get in the way and be annoying. But you might like them, but we wish we could use these, I guess, to move around the board. But if you like that extra scenery, they're there. The cars are fantastic. The vehicles, I really like how they look. They're easy to remember whose is whose. They're painted. They're just, I don't know, they add to the fun and the flavor of the game. I'm also a big fan of all the different items. In fact, I like that the symbol for an item is a hat, and they got all different hats. A black hat, and they have a white hat, and a trucker hat, and a lucky hat. And so, I don't know, I enjoyed that the hats were very useful. That was fun. And the symbology on the cards themselves is very clear. The cards are also good quality. You'll notice that on my particular board, the board is a little broken here, but this game was played to death at a convention and has held up pretty well. I would say the rule book was not the clearest. It explains things, but the starting worm attacks and putting it together, I thought could have been probably played out a little bit better. It's not too bad. I just thought the rule book could have been a bit better. Terror Below is just sheer fun, right? There's no deep strategy that's involved with this game. You're just going to go around. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's strategic things you can do. You're trying to play cards to move a worm away from you, trying to play cards to worm to make that worm hopefully attack other players. And then you got to figure out how to get these eggs and deliver them. It's at its core a pick up and deliver game where you want to go around, grab the eggs, take them to different locations, maybe get a point or 2 here, but hopefully deliver some that give you those 3-4 points to help you get to 20 points faster. It is not a long game. We're talking 45 minutes an hour, but it is sheer, this is a game that when you play it, it makes sense. There's a lot of games that I say the theme is pasted on, where you could take a different theme, put it on the game, and you wouldn't notice. This one makes sense. The worms are going around underneath the soil, coming out, and they're tough. They're not these minuscule worms. If you defeat a worm, that is something for everyone to kind of applaud you about, because it's a big deal. And it's just fun to have all these weapons, and it reminds me of the scene in Tremors where the worm comes to the wall and they're just sitting there. They got 65 guns and shooting them at it, and then you have that same feeling here. You go around and play Rubble and you collect the weapons, and usually that's a temptation in this game. As you get these Rubble, you're like, well, I'll take another weapon. I'll take another weapon. But the items are pretty handy too. You can manipulate the worms away from you, avoid a worm attack, do all sorts of things. So the game is silly. In fact, I love playing on the canyon side because I like making those giant canyon leaps. You get a victory point for showing off. There's one of the hat cards. You just get a victory point for having the cool hat, which makes sense. Not really, but in this game world, it makes sense. And it just gives you that strong theming. Again, I think people who are looking for deep strategy will be thrown off, especially if you play with more than 3 players. At that point, you don't have a lot of control between turns. That worm's going to be moving all over the place, and it could easily attack you from turn to turn. But at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. Even if you die in this game, player elimination, only 1 player is eliminated, and that means it's happened to you 3 times. The special abilities of the characters are a lot of fun too. So let me just pull up some of these characters here. So like I got the government researcher Carlos. At the end of your turn, move a target token 2 spaces in any direction. Pretty handy guy to have around. Move a worm away from you. Handyman Merle. When you turn in Rubble for an item card, look at the top 3 cards of the item deck and choose one and keep the rest. Oh, I like that. If a worm attacks Old George, Shepherd Old George, you can choose to kill him. If you do, defeat the worm. Well, that could be pretty handy. I like Old George. He ain't going to last in my games, but it's a neat thing. Graduate student Patricia, when you play a 3 vehicle card, you get 7 action points to play instead. Homemaker Rebecca, you can end your turn on the same spot as somebody else. Most people can't do that. And Pottery Maker Al, when he's holding worms, when he's holding eggs, he gets extra movement. Life Coach Sebastian, his hand size is 4 cards. So this stuff here, I like that the characters come to life. I like the different weapons and the items. And so the game feels a little bit like a movie, feels like a fun story, an event of things that are happening. Terror Below is, we call these Ameritrash games, the game you just go in and see what happens and have fun with the story. But it has good things too. It's not just bundles of luck. There's a lot of interesting things, and there's definitely a lot of player interaction. And it's the kind of game that when you're done, you'll tell a story about. I think it's a good, solid family game. It's the kind of game I wish that they would sell at Target. These are the kind of games that you'd be on the shelf. It will attract people who like the Tremors movie franchise, or if not, just like the idea of driving trucks around and avoiding worms. There's that cool moments in it, and so I enjoyed it. That's Terror Below. Dice Tower Judgment approved.
Thanks so much for watching another Dice Tower video. If you enjoy our videos, subscribe to the channel for more fun, comprehensive board game coverage. Also, consider joining us at one of our events. Come to Dice Tower Retreat, a small, intimate gathering where gaming is king. Join us for Dice Tower Cruise, the largest board game cruise. Attend Dice Tower West in Las Vegas for gaming fun on the West Coast, or Dice Tower East in Orlando, in sunny Florida. Dice Tower Conventions, the friendliest gaming conventions on Earth. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.